Welcome back to Grade 8 History, Unit Number 1, Creating Canada, 1850 to 1890. This is Lesson Number 10, How did the Métis challenge the federal government? Before we begin today's lesson, let's consider the following. Imagine the government started making changes to your community that you did not agree with. What action might you take to challenge the government? I want you to put the video on pause so that you can take some time to consider this question and then write down your answer to the question of what action you might take to challenge the government. And let's begin. As part of the 1870 Manitoba Act, the federal government promised to set aside land for 7,000 descendants of the Red River Métis. By 1884, the Métis were still waiting for their land. Tired and frustrated, many Métis left Manitoba for the District of Saskatchewan to join other Métis communities that were already there. New immigrants kept moving to Manitoba, so by 1884, Manitoba's Métis population was just 7%. In May of 1884, a group of 4 Métis men, including a Saskatchewan Métis leader named Gabriel Dumont, traveled to Montana to meet with Louis Riel. They wanted Riel to lead a protest against the federal government. What they found was that Riel had become a deeply religious man. This would prove to be a problem, as Riel believed that an invitation to lead the Métis again was a sign of the Christian God's greater plan for him. And in this scene from Chester Brown's graphic novel, Louis Riel, Riel is praying for guidance with making a decision to return to Manitoba. I think I spoke about this in an earlier video. Chester Brown's Louis Riel is a great graphic novel. Now, it does take some liberties with facts, established history. For example, there's a scene in the graphic novel where the Métis go ahead and execute Thomas Scott without Riel's knowledge or permission, and that's not true. In reality, it was Louis Riel who authorized the execution of Thomas Scott. But aside from Chester Brown taking some liberties and changing the history, his book is actually a really neat read, a lot of fun to read, and you can pick it up at a lot of different uh, bookstores as well as your local public library. Riel returned, and he and his followers petitioned the federal government to settle both Métis and new settler land claims. The federal government responded in May 1885, promising to form a committee to investigate the issue. Many Métis saw this as just another delaying tactic by the government. Riel and Dumont felt that it was time for drastic action. They organized an army of 300 men and signed a secret oath which included promising to take up arms, or weapons, quote unquote, if necessary. In March of 1885, Riel formed a new provisional government. Although his official title was president, Riel referred to himself as the prophet of the New World. Dumont was chosen to lead the militia, a group of fighters who are regular citizens. The federal government heard of these developments and alerted government troops to prepare for battle. On March 26th of 1885, the Battle of Duck Lake broke out. Dumont had raided a store in Duck Lake for supplies. A group of 100 Northwest Mounted Police officers tried to track down Dumont and his 300 men to take back the supplies. To avoid violence, Dumont ordered his men to hide while his brother and a Cree elder spoke with the police. A fight still broke out and gunshots were fired. Men on both sides were killed and the NWMP were forced to retreat. After the Battle of Duck Lake, the federal government sent 3,000 troops to the northwest. In 1870, it had been very difficult to send troops since there was no railway line. By 1885, there was a railway, and it took only 11 days to send the first troops to the northwest. The railway also allowed the troops to bring in large supplies of weapons. One of these weapons was the Gatling gun, which is like an early version of a machine gun. After Duck Lake, there were several battles in April of 1885. Toward the end of the month, Major General Frederick Middleton and his troops were headed for Riel's headquarters in Batoche. Dumont led his men to Fish Creek, where they ambushed Middleton's men and forced them to retreat. The retreat was short-lived, however. By May, Middleton had a force of over 800 men bearing down on Batoche. Dumont, having less than 300 men, wanted to use guerrilla tactics, in other words, ambushes and surprise attacks, in the countryside to drive the troops out. Riel refused. He believed that God wanted to punish the troops by allowing the enemy to enter the Métis headquarters, where they would face certain death. The battle lasted only 3 days. The troops charged the Métis front line, which now consisted of only 50 to 60 men. The Métis ran out of ammunition and fled. Dumont and his closest followers escaped to the U.S. So clearly, God had decided to stay out of the fight. Sorry, I couldn't help insert that poor joke. On May 15th, Riel surrendered. He believed that a public trial would bring attention to the Métis' struggle against the government. The trial, which began in July of 1885, was moved from Winnipeg to Regina. This was because Winnipeg had a higher Métis population than Regina. Prime Minister MacDonald feared that a Winnipeg jury would be more supportive of Riel. In Regina, the jury was made of all English-speaking Protestants. Only one juror spoke French. And this is an actual photograph from Riel's trial. My question for you is, why do you think so many people attended the trial? Please put the video on pause so that you can consider and then write down your response to that question. Now let's continue. Riel's lawyers wanted to plead insanity, but he refused. He felt that if he was portrayed as insane, the Métis cause would not be recognized properly. The trial lasted only 4 days, with the jury finding Riel guilty of treason. The jury recommended mercy, which surprised many. MacDonald considered whether to support the jury's decision. Although the French-Canadian minority saw Riel as a hero, MacDonald reasoned that by letting Riel go free, he would be offending the English-Canadian majority. In order to keep a higher percentage of voter support, MacDonald ordered that Riel be hanged. And here's one of a number of political cartoons from the time. My question here is, why do you think the artist decided to show MacDonald keeping Riel in a birdcage? Put the video on pause so that you can take a closer look at this picture and then write down your response to the question I just asked. Let's continue. For weeks after the trial, the Canadian public debated Riel's death sentence. In Quebec, politicians stirred up the anger of French Catholics. For the French, Riel was a hero of not only the Métis, but of all French-speaking Canadians. The anger was so fierce that the news of their demonstrations was reported internationally. Although in 1992, Riel was recognized by the federal government as the founder of Manitoba, the decision to hang him is still controversial. So to wrap up, I've got 3 questions for you to consider. Number 1, compared to the 1870 resistance, do Riel's actions in the 1885 resistance show progress or decline? For Riel, for the Métis, or both? And why do you feel this way? Question number 2, do you feel MacDonald made the right decision to execute Riel? And why do you feel this way? And lastly, number 3, do you feel that Louis Riel is a hero or a traitor? And again, why do you feel this way? So 3 big questions to consider. So when I'm done talking, you are going to put the video on pause so that you can write down your thoughts on these 3 questions. If you don't feel confident in your ability to answer any or all of these questions, it means you need to go back, watch this video at least one more time, and then when you're ready, put the video on pause. I look forward to a lively discussion of these and the other questions posted throughout this recording. But until our next class, this concludes today's video.